What is going on, everybody? It's Buddy here. Today I'm going to show you guys how I took this poorly running, no AC having $500 truck and turned it into thousands of dollars in profit. Now, if you watched my channel before, I'm mostly a DIY channel, but I am going to start a segment on flipping cars. The process I do it, I've done it many times in the past. This is actually the first vehicle I fully documented here on video. So if you want to learn how to get potentially profitable vehicles at low prices, how to fix them up and flip them and make a bunch of money on the back end, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. I'm going to show you guys the entire process of how I bought it, what I thought I should buy it for, what I knew I could sell it for, and ultimately how much money I put into it and how much money I made. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. So my favorite place to look for cars to flip is Facebook Marketplace. I'm always on it, checking for deals, seeing what's out there. So I stumbled upon this little Chevy Blazer. These are actual pictures of it here. The exterior looked good. There was no faded paint for an older truck. The interior looked good. There was no cracks, there was no rips, there was no tears in the seats or anything like that. Now I noticed the price was set at about $1,400. The truck had 140,000 miles on it, which is pretty low for a truck of this year. And I know these Chevy Blazers will sell quick. They're a popular truck. At the right price, they're gonna fly off the shelf. So upon reading the description of the vehicle, it says AC does not work. Don't know what's wrong with it. It stated there is minor rust on the undercarriage. It also says the truck does not run smooth at idle. Vehicle will shut off at red lights but starts right back up. Runs great otherwise. Now the one thing I really did like in the description, it said bought from original owner 3 months ago. All service records were kept from mile 3000 in the service manual. Now considering the original owner bought this truck 20 years ago, has the original owner's manual and documented every single bit of service in there, I knew he was an older gentleman. I knew he was an old school guy who was probably very meticulous with this truck. Now what you guys are looking at here is the actual service manual of the truck. This guy really did document every single little thing from the first service at 3,000 miles. Now I speak from experience when I say that is not a big selling point, that is a huge selling point. People absolutely love that. This is already a really popular vehicle. I know for a fact this thing fixed up will sell quick, so I knew I had to get this truck. So I went on Kelley Blue Book, and honestly, I don't use Kelley Blue Book to buy vehicles, but 90% of people do. If you're looking to sell it, this is what most people are going to default to. So you want to make sure that you know that this is kind of what everyone's looking at when they're looking to buy a car. Now the number I'm looking at right here is at 3,119. That is the upper end of the Kelley Blue Book value. If this thing is running smooth, the AC works great, and someone sees that the whole life of the car has been documented in the back of the owner's manual where the service records are, I know I'm going to be able to get that upper end for sure. So I immediately set out to go see this truck here in person. I did know that $1,400 was going to be a little steep for this truck just because I knew it definitely needed some things. I know new parts for these old Chevys are dirt cheap, so I knew I didn't have to put that much money into it, even if there was a couple more things wrong that wasn't specified on the description. And that's also a very important note to keep in mind when you are looking for a vehicle to flip. You want to make sure you don't shoot for those BMWs, those Audis. Of course, if you find a killer deal, don't let it up. But at the same time, keep in mind the parts for those cars are a lot more expensive than something like this Blazer. Now with this truck, knowing that the AC was bad and it was running real rough, I didn't know what I was going to get into fixing it. Maybe it just needed some Freon to make the air cold again, and something silly like an O2 sensor making it run really rough on the idle. Or it could need multiple components here on an AC system, or it could have all kinds of different things wrong with it, causing vacuum leaks, bad sensors, or whatever the case. So $500 is definitely where I wanted to be to make sure I made a profit. Now upon arriving, honestly, I was very impressed with the vehicle's condition on the inside and outside. There's no cracks, no rips, there's no dents, there's no scratches, there's no rust on the body. Everything looked really good. I'm gonna play you guys a quick video of what the engine sounded like at idle. It was a very rough idle. This is actually after I took it home. So this is actually the engine of the exact same truck we're talking about. Yeah, it sounded pretty rough to say the least. So the very first thing I did when I got to the seller's house was hook up my OBD2 reader to the truck. I always bring one of these with me anytime I go to buy a car. It's definitely something important that everybody should have in their toolbox. I'm going to put a link in the description for 3 of them I recommend. One's going to be at a lower price point, maybe 25 to 30 bucks. One's going to be kind of a mid-grade, around 60 to 70. And then one's going to be a little bit higher tier, around 100 to 150. So when I hooked up my OBD reader to the truck, I got a code back, P0171. System 2 lean bank 1. So what that means is either the engine's getting too little fuel or is getting too much air. Too much air is caused from a vacuum leak, or not enough fuel is getting into your engine. Either your fuel filter's clogged, you got a clog in one of your lines, maybe one of your fuel injectors are clogged up, or your fuel pump's starting to go out. Or if you get real lucky, it's something as simple as just a mass airflow sensor needs to be cleaned, or you got a bad O2 sensor. Now another thing I wanted to check before I made a seller an offer on the vehicle was the AC compressor. Now I knew the AC was blowing warm air, but I wanted to see if that was because the AC compressor wasn't working or if it just had a freon leak. Now what I did is I brought a staple with me. Now I always bring a staple with me to any kind of car deal that I want to do that a vehicle has no AC in. With a staple, all you got to do is find the low side of the AC system, find the little sensor, and then just stick the staple inside of the sensor that goes into the low side. So now you can see the compressor is spinning, so our little staple trick worked. Now I also checked the radiator cap. I didn't see any brown gunk like this. And I also checked the oil cap and took a peek in the crankcase. I didn't see any kind of sludge like this, and that would be indicative of a blown head gasket, and that's not something I want to deal with in this vehicle. So now at least I know the compressor works. There's a freon leak, of course, and there's also a vacuum leak or a fuel issue. So now at this point, it's time to make the seller my $500 offer. I'm happy with the vehicle. I think I can make a little money on it. So this is the fun part. This is when you get to finally make an offer. You get to do a little negotiating. This is the exciting part for me. So you can write this part down. I pretty much say this word for word every vehicle I buy. So let's just say the seller's name was Bob in this case. I'll say, hey Bob, so obviously the vehicle does need some work. I'm gonna have to put a little money into it. It's actually a little worse than I thought. So I'll be right up front with you. I don't want to waste either of our time, so I'll give you a straight offer. I think the vehicle is worth $500 considering the multiple issues it has, and that's what I'm willing to pay for it. So probably about 30% of the time, they're just going to say, fine, take it away. I've been looking at it too long, because you got to remember, these vehicles don't run right. So they've probably been sitting around for a while, probably gave them a headache. They probably tried changing some fuses. They probably looked at a couple of YouTube videos to see if there's a quick fix. They already called their uncle in another state who used to work on cars. Point being, they're sick of looking at these cars. They want them gone. So they're going to take that $500, $600, $700. They're going to take that $1,000. They're going to take that low ball offer. Now, if they start saying, oh, well, what about $1,000? What about $1,500? The last thing I'm going to say is this, and I almost say this word for word. Now, I understand what you're saying, Bob, and I know it's not what you wanted to hear, but to be honest, anyone who's going to buy this car is obviously going to be mechanically inclined, and it's ultimately going to take a risk in buying this car. We don't 1000% know what's all wrong with it. All we know that it needs work, and obviously new parts, which cost money, of course. The last thing I want to do is rip you off, but even more so, I wouldn't want to buy a car and dump so much money into it that I end up spending more than what it's worth. My offer stands firm at $500. I have the money in the car right now. You'll never have to look at this thing again. All you got to do is say yes. Now at that point, once you made sure that they know that you are firm at your offer, and on top of that, you're not trying to rip them off, you just let them know where you're coming from in terms of the price, you should be able to strike a deal. And for whatever reason, if they're one of the sellers that will not budge on the car, for whatever reason, you got to learn to just walk away. There's way too many people out there that are willing to give you their business. Get rid of that old car sitting in their driveway and be done with it. Now in this case, I was able to convince the guy $500 is a good number for this car. So I took the keys and I drove the car home. So now that we got the truck back at the house, it's time to start fixing it up. So remember, we have a rough idle caused by either too little fuel or too much air. And on top of that, we have an AC leak. So what I'm gonna do is see if I can get the truck running smooth again before I even start messing with the AC. So remember, these are all the potential things I could be giving it a rough idle. The first thing I was gonna start with is the fuel filter. I checked out under the car, the fuel filter looked a little old. Even if the fuel filter wasn't the culprit of the rough idle, I decided to do it anyways just because I had one laying around and it looks like it was about time for a new one anyways. So I got under the truck, I found the fuel filter, I pulled out the old one, and I replaced it with the new one. Now all these videos I'm going to show you are actual videos of me working on this exact Chevy Blazer. So if you want to check out this video on how to change your fuel filter in a Chevy, and honestly it's similar for most vehicles, not just Chevys. Once you watch the video, get a main idea of how to do it. I'll go ahead and throw a link in the description for all the videos I made working on this vehicle. So now we got the fuel filter changed out, it's time to start the truck up and see if we fix the rough idle. So it looks like the fuel filter wasn't the cause of a rough idle, so we're going to go ahead and cross that off our list. So now it's time to start keeping track of how much money we got invested in this vehicle. We have $500 into the truck itself, and then about $15 for a fuel filter at AutoZone. And as I said earlier, I already had the fuel filter on hand, but I'm just going to add it to the list anyways. And if you're finding the video helpful, please hit that thumbs up button. I would really appreciate it, and also lets me know you guys like these car flipping tutorial videos. The next thing I'm going to try is the mass airflow sensor. Maybe it's just a little dirty and gunked up, and it needs to be cleaned with some mass airflow sensor cleaner. Now upon removing the mass airflow sensor to clean it, I actually made a discovery here. Now take a listen to the engine while the mass airflow sensor is unplugged, then listen to it again while it's plugged in. Now watch when I plug this in. So this is kind of good news, because what this means is there's either a vacuum leak, the mass airflow sensor is dirty or it's faulty, or there's a faulty O2 sensor. So this kind of ruled it down to an airflow issue or a sensor issue and not a fuel issue. So we're going to go ahead and cross these two off right here. So cleaning the mass airflow sensor is a pretty easy procedure. You just take the screws out that hold the hose clamps in, you pull it off, and then what you do is you spray it down with mass airflow sensor cleaner. I have a whole video on this. I'll put it in the description as well. You definitely want to use mass airflow sensor cleaner. You don't want to use carb cleaner, WD-40, nothing like that. Mass airflow sensor cleaner only. So let's put it back in the truck and see if it was just a dirty mass airflow sensor. So it wasn't a dirty mass airflow sensor, but maybe it was just a faulty unit altogether. So let's swap it out for a new one. And I bought this one on Amazon.com simply because of the return policy. I figured if it wasn't a faulty mass airflow sensor, I'd be able to return it no issue. I was working on a lot of cars at the time, so I didn't mind waiting the 2 days for shipping. When it finally came in, I swapped it out with the old one. So let's see if it fixed our rough idle. So it looks like the mass airflow sensor was not the issue at all, so I went ahead and returned it to Amazon for a full refund. So let's go ahead and cross the mass airflow sensor off of our list of potential problems. So at this point, I'm more suspicious of a vacuum leak as opposed to a faulty O2 sensor. So what I did is I inspected the entire engine bay for all of the vacuum hoses for any rips, tears, dried or cracked vacuum hoses, anything along the sort that would cause a vacuum leak. And then I noticed all the hoses look really good. The guy must actually replace them a few thousand miles ago because they all look fairly new. And then I looked over at the brake booster, because usually if your vacuum hoses are good, your PCV valve, your EGR, or your brake booster is what's causing the vacuum leak. And I took a peek over the brake booster and it actually looked pretty rusted out. So here's a video of me vacuum testing the brake booster to see if that was the culprit of our vacuum leak in this Blazer. So on the left side of our brake booster, we're going to have this vacuum hose, and we're going to take this off and we're going to actually plug it up. And what I'm going to use to plug this up is just the back of a 3/8 socket. Now I'm going to play a quick clip of the video before we actually plug this hole. And now this is what the idle sounds like with the hole plugged. So you can see there, right when I plugged up the vacuum hose for the brake booster, it idled perfectly. So I knew that was the cause of the vacuum leak. I figured it out. All I needed to do was replace the brake booster. You can see here, this is a video of me actually replacing the brake booster. It's about an 1.5 hour job. It's not horrible. Now the video is geared more towards Chevy trucks, but honestly, they all are pretty similar. So if you watch the whole video, honestly, you'll be able to do it on almost any vehicle. I'll go ahead and leave the link for that video in the description. And if you look here, you can see the back of the brake booster is actually blown out from all the rust. Brake fluid's really corrosive, so it ate away at all that metal. That's what caused that vacuum leak. So we're gonna pop the new one in there, and the truck after that ran beautiful. So going back to our chart to see how much money we have invested in this truck, we have $500 for the truck. We got $15 for the fuel filter, and then we're going to tack on $110 for the brake booster. Now you can get them cheaper online, but I decided to just go to Advanced Auto Parts and just knock it out that day. And remember, we returned the mass airflow sensor back to Amazon. We popped the old one in and got a full refund for that. So grand total, all we have in this truck is $625. For $625, we got a perfectly good running truck. We are not doing bad at all. The only issue is there's no AC, so let's jump right into the AC issue. So remember, we did test the compressor at the seller's house with our staple trick, and it worked. So that leads me to believe that there is a Freon leak in the vehicle. So we went up to Advanced Auto Parts again, and we got some AC stop leak and some Freon. I pumped it into the system, and it blew cold. I was stoked. I was hoping it would stay, but unfortunately after about an hour, all the Freon leaked out, so this hole was pretty big. So at this point, I performed a leak detection test to see where the actual leak is coming from, so we could replace the component or the gasket that's leaking. Now again, I do have a link in the description of this exact vehicle that I performed an AC dye leak test on. It's fairly simple. All you need is a can of Freon and some AC dye, a black light flashlight, and some UV glasses. You just pump the AC dye in the system with the can of Freon pushing it in there. You let it run for about 20 minutes, and then what you do is get your flashlight and your UV glasses, go in a dark garage or wait till the sun drops, and the AC dye is gonna glow really bright. It's going to pop out like a sore thumb. You can't miss it. And that's going to indicate what part is leaking or which gasket's leaking, which fitting is leaking, and what you need to replace. When I performed this test on the vehicle, I did not see any fittings or any components that had AC dye coming out. So what that indicates is either the condenser is leaking and I can't see it, or something called the evaporator core is leaking. So I wasn't 100% sure what part is leaking, so I went ahead and ordered a condenser and an evaporator for this Blazer, just to make sure I definitely fixed the leak. So the price difference between getting these these at Advance and ordering them online was substantial, so I went ahead and ordered these two online. Now, changing the evaporator was the only thing on this vehicle that I didn't document on video, just based on the fact that it is a very involved job. You can see I took the tire off, the whole left side of the engine bay off, pulled off the cover, put the new one in, and then put everything back together. That did take about 3.5 hours. That was a pretty involved job, like I said. Now, as you can see, I did make a video here on changing the condenser out. The condenser was as simple as just pulling the radiator out, pulling the condenser out from behind it, and then sticking everything back together. Obviously, it's a little easier said than done, but if you check out my video, you'll see exactly what I mean. It's a pretty straightforward process. So now that we got those installed, let's take another look at our money invested. We got $500 for the truck, $15 for the fuel filter, $110 for the brake booster. Believe it or not, on partsgeek.com, the evaporator was only $65 and the condenser was only $35. And this is including shipping and everything. Now that the AC system was all fixed up, I took a drive down to Advanced Auto Parts and picked up some Freon and some compressor oil. Now, I do have a video on how to properly put Freon in your car or truck. With the new AC parts, I recharged the truck's AC system to factory specs. I fired it up and I checked the temperature on the AC vents. And it was blowing ice cold. There was no leaks in the system. The AC was completely fixed. So now we're going to go back to our money invested chart and we're going to add Freon and compressor oil. Came out to a whopping $37. Now I also grabbed 5 quarts of oil and an oil filter, and that came out to $24. And then I got 2 spray cans, one a rust inhibitor primer and the other one a trim and bumper paint. And those came out to $11. I changed the oil and the oil filter on the Blazer. I then sanded some parts down on the undercarriage and sprayed them with the rust inhibitor primer. Now you want to make sure if you do this, you don't spray with any cheap paint. You spray it with something that says stop rust on it, because then it has rust inhibitor chemicals in it. And then the last 2 things I did is restore the bumper and the door handles, but this really changed the look of the truck. It really dolled it up and made it look more presentable. So I will have links in the description on how to restore your bumper or your handles, any black trim on your car for that matter. So now we are done. Going back to our money invested chart, we're going to add everything up. The truck for $500, the fuel filter for $15, the brake booster for $110, the evaporator, the condenser, the Freon. Everything together came out to a whopping $797. So we got a truck worth about $3,100 and we only paid $797, less than $800 for it. We are on top of it on this one. Now the only thing left was to post some ads and find a buyer for this truck. Now you can see from this ad I made, I really hyped the truck up. You never want to put a short description of your vehicle. You want to make a nice long descriptive description about your vehicle, explaining all the good things about it. Everything works, runs perfect, nothing wrong with the truck at all, truly diamond in the rough. Purchased from an elderly man who followed the owner's manual service guide to a T. Every oil change, coolant flush, brake flush, power steering flush, and everything in between has been meticulously done by this elderly gentleman, documented and recorded since the first 3,000 miles, new AC, condenser, and evaporator, and 140,000 pampered miles. So this step might seem a little silly and unnecessary, but trust me, it's definitely appropriate. You're going to get a whole lot more people messaging you about the vehicle, and on top of that, you're going to justify why you're asking for the upper end of the Kelley Blue Book value. After sitting on Craigslist and Facebook for about 8 days, I finally got someone who seemed fairly interested, so we scheduled the time for him to come see the truck. And then you can see here from the screenshot on my cell phone, that is all she wrote. He came and saw the truck, he loved it, he put a $500 deposit on it, wired me $2,000 the next day, and then brought another $500 cash with him when he came to pick it up. I could tell instantly he liked the truck, he was gonna buy it no matter what price, so I held firm at my $3,000 and he shook my hand on the deal. So remember, all the money we had invested in this truck came out to a whopping $797. We'll round that up to $800. $3,000 as a sale price minus $800 comes out to a profit of $2,200. Now that's just one example of a car I flipped. I have a lot more cars coming up for you guys, so be sure to subscribe, check out my channel, and show me some love by hitting that thumbs up button. Thanks for sticking around for the whole video, guys. As I said in the beginning of this video, I am predominantly a DIY channel, so here's some videos that you guys might like. So check out my channel and have a good rest of the day.